So, up until now in this series, I've been talking about how institutions train behavior before confrontation ever happens. In the last episode, we looked at bureaucracy, how people learn to anticipate futility and quietly step back before they even try. So, today I want to take that question one step further, not just what people expect from institutions, but what they calculate about themselves, right? Not anticipation of refusal, not withdrawal from futility, but fear. Because once people start asking what speaking up could cost them, participation isn't just unlikely, it's dangerous. Risk doesn't just discourage action, it redefines what a good citizen looks like. Most conversations about political engagement focus on motivation, why people care, what they believe, how to inspire them. But the deeper question, I think, is calculation. Before someone posts, signs a petition, shows up to a meeting, or even has a conversation, they don't just ask, do I want to? They ask, can I afford to? And for a lot of people here in the US right now, the answer is no. Not because they're apathetic, because the math doesn't work. Think of the recent waves of protests we've seen over immigration enforcement, workplace policies, the school walkouts. Plenty of people agree with the cause, but how many skip them? And not from disagreement, but because a photo from the crowd could end up in an HR file, trigger a benefits review, or even worse. And this is where visibility becomes its own kind of power. Being seen isn't neutral. Being seen can mean being targeted, and once people learn that, they don't just avoid certain actions, they avoid being legible at all. Institutions don't have to tell people to be quiet. The landscape of consequences does that work. Think about what people weigh before they act. A parent running the numbers. If I speak out at this local meeting, could it affect my next job review? If I post online about these policies, could it show up in a background check? If I join this group, could it flag me for immigration status, custody, licensing, or benefits? And those aren't paranoid questions, they're practical ones. And once people start asking them regularly, especially with the current administration's crackdowns on dissent and heightened enforcement, something shifts, right? Safety becomes the first filter of citizenship. Participation stops being about principle, it starts being about exposure. And this training happens through very concrete channels right here in the US. Workplaces with speech policies that stretch to cover disruptive political activity, like teachers wondering if walking out will cost their certification, police who film protests more than they protect, algorithms that make every like or share permanent, immigration systems where one rally photo can trigger scrutiny, child welfare agencies that treat activism as instability. No one needs a formal gag order when the structure of consequence is already there. So over time, people don't just learn which actions are risky, they learn which people are risky to be around. They learn to scan rooms, check profiles, avoid certain affiliations, not because they disagree, but because association carries weight, especially when federal agencies are watching social media closer than ever. And this is how risk starts sorting communities. Some people can treat politics as conversation or hobby. They tweet freely, attend freely, organize freely. For them, visibility costs nothing or costs reputation they can shrug off. Others experience the same politics as a minefield. One misstep at a rally and it's your job, your status, your record, your family. For them, staying legible means staying safe. Staying invisible means staying whole. And that asymmetry is the training, and you can hear it in the way people talk when the stakes get real. I agree with you about those enforcement actions, but I would come to the march except. That's right about the deportations, but not for me. Those pauses aren't laziness or cowardice, they're diagnosis. There's someone running the math of what visibility would mean for their life. And this is where fear becomes cultural. It doesn't just shape individuals, it reshapes relationships, right? People stop inviting each other to certain conversations. They stop sharing certain links. They stop showing up together. Not because the solidarity isn't there necessarily, but because the risk is asymmetric, especially when you see coworkers questioned or neighbors flagged after speaking out. So what starts as personal calculation spreads as social friction. And you see this most clearly when risk collides with existing vulnerability. A tenant organizer who can't risk arrest because it means losing work release, or a teacher who can't risk a viral clip because it means losing certification. A visa holder who can't risk association because it means losing status amid mass deportations. A single parent who can't risk doxing because it means losing custody. And for those people, politics doesn't feel abstract, it feels like a threat vector. And when enough people make that same calculation, something larger happens. Collective action doesn't just slow, It fragments, and the people who could lead it step back first, not from lack of anger, but from clarity about cost. What remains gets described as the loud ones or the usual suspects, while the quieter majority learns that staying safe is its own kind of responsibility. This is also why certain kinds of dissent get criminalized, not through laws, but through adjacency. And you don't have to break a window to get on a list. You just have to stand near someone who might, especially when federal surveillance of protests is ramped up this year. Risk doesn't target action, it targets presence. Over time, this produces a very specific kind of citizen, one who is mapped not just what institutions will do, but what they might do. One who treats silence not as surrender, but as strategy. One who's learned that the first political question isn't what do I believe, but what can I survive? And that's the training of fear. What makes this so effective is how ordinary it looks. No dramatic crackdowns, no mass arrest yet. Just the steady drip of examples. Someone fired after a workplace walkout, someone flagged after a protest photo, someone questioned after a post, someone denied benefits after an association. Enough stories circulate that people don't need to experience it themselves to feel it. The lesson lands horizontally through conversation, through cautionary tales, through the person next to you who says, "Be careful." And once that lesson lands, institutions gain something better than obedience. They gain precaution. People don't need to be silenced when they silence themselves. They don't need to be punished when they avoid the punishment in the first place. Right? So when we talk about political disengagement, we tend to focus on the wrong things. We talk about apathy, polarization, media bubbles, but sometimes the simplest explanation is also the truest. People aren't showing up because showing up could cost them, especially under an administration that rewards loyalty and punishes dissent. Risk doesn't just explain absence, it explains why power so often feels unopposed. In the next part of the series, I want to look at what happens when people push past that calculation anyway, when they refuse to let fear or futility set the terms. Who gets to sound angry and be called principled? Who gets called a threat? And how the tone and style of dissent gets sorted into leadership or problem. For now, I want to leave you with this. Think about the last time you held back, not because you didn't care, but because you could see what speaking or showing up might cost. What was at stake for you? And how much of our shared political life is shaped by those quiet calculations that never make it into the conversation? Look forward to hearing from you in the comments. You all have an awesome day. See you soon.